Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive on a topic that's been on everyone's mind, I think, the spread of online misinformation.
Well, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and trying to make sense of it all can be a real challenge. We've got some really fascinating excerpts from this Noble magazine article. It's called How Online Misinformation Spreads.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
We're going to figure out how an idea, whether it's true or false, can basically go viral.
You know, it's interesting because the World Health Organization, they actually have a term for this era of information overload. They call it an infodemic, especially when we're talking about misleading or false content.
Infodemic, okay. That's a good one. Definitely feels very appropriate right now. What's a good example of this in action?
Well, think about that, the Bill Gates microchip conspiracy theory that was going around. You know?
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. Wasn't that the one where, like, he was supposedly trying to implant microchips in people through the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, that's the one. And get this, a Yahoo YouGov poll actually found that 44% of Republicans believed it.
Wow.
It really shows how, even something so outlandish can actually gain traction.
44%, that's a huge number. It makes you wonder, how does something like that even take hold? Is this like related to the way social media works, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Social media has completely changed how we communicate. I mean, think about it. We've gone from this system where information was really carefully curated and disseminated by, like traditional media outlets.
Right.
To this system where anyone can basically produce and share information.
Instantly
To a massive audience.
Yeah, so it's like unlike traditional media where there were those, gatekeepers, fact checkers, now it's more of a free-for-all, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's really tempting to think that those viral ideas, especially the false ones, are mainly spread by, those shady bots and trolls and people with, malicious intent.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common assumption. But is that actually the case?
Well, it's interesting. The research is actually showing that a lot of misinformation is spread by regular people.
Really? So it's not some shadowy group kind of like manipulating things behind the scenes?
Well, not exactly. Researchers have found that there's this small number of individuals, sometimes they call them super spreaders, and they're responsible for amplifying a huge amount of misinformation.
Super spreaders. So you're saying that there are certain people who are really effective at getting these ideas to spread. Who are these people? Like, who are the super spreaders?
It's often media personalities or even politicians, people who have large online followings.
Right.
They might not even be intentionally spreading misinformation. It's just that because of their reach, they sort of unintentionally amplify it.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. They're followers, they trust them, so they're more likely to, believe what they see, share it with others.
Exactly. There was this study on the 2016 election, I think it was. They found that something like 0.1% of users generated 80% of the misinformation related to the election.
80%, that's wild. It really highlights the power of individual influence, even if it's unintentional. So, how do researchers even begin to study something like this? I mean, tracking the spread of misinformation, that just sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is. It's really complex. But researchers are taking inspiration from a really interesting place, epidemiology. They're actually applying those epidemiological models to try to study how misinformation spreads online.
Like the science of how diseases spread.
Exactly.
What's the connection there?
Well, think about it. Just like a virus can spread from person to person, ideas can spread in a similar way. And researchers are finding that the contagiousness of an idea can actually be measured.
So you're saying there's a way to measure how likely an idea, even a false one, is to basically go viral. That's fascinating.
It is. It's really interesting. They use this concept called the R value, which is basically a measure of how many other people, on average, one person will infect with that idea.
Infect.
So an R value of greater than 1 means that the idea is spreading exponentially.
So if an idea has an R value of 2, that means each person who sees it is going to spread it to, on average, 2 more people.
Exactly. And get this, they found that the R value for COVID-19 misinformation on platforms like Twitter, Reddit, was consistently greater than 1. So it was spreading really rapidly.
That's kind of alarming, right? It really makes you think about the spread of misinformation like a contagious disease.
It really does.
So what makes these misleading ideas so contagious? What's the secret sauce, so to speak?
Well, one of the things is that misinformation often contains elements of truth.
Yeah.
That makes it more persuasive.
Oh, so it's not always completely made up.
Not necessarily. Sometimes it's like a distortion or misrepresentation of real facts. Remember that Bill Gates microchip example? That stemmed from actual research on using quantum dots, for vaccination records.
Oh, right, right. I remember reading something about that. But that research was just about tracking vaccination records, not, implanting microchips for some kind of surveillance, right?
Exactly. But conspiracy theorists took that kernel of truth and they twisted it into something completely different.
Right, yeah. It's like they take those pieces of information and then weave them into narratives that kind of fit their worldview.
Exactly. People tend to gravitate towards information that confirms their existing beliefs. And this is why misinformation can be so resistant to fact-checking, because it aligns with what people already think.
So even when they're presented with evidence to the contrary, they might just double down on what they already believe.
Unfortunately, that's often the case. It's a really complex psychological phenomenon.
Yeah. So it seems like understanding how those narratives take shape and spread is really key to combating misinformation. But how do we even begin to map out this complex ecosystem of misinformation? Where does it all come from? How does it all connect?
Well, that's where the work of researcher Neil Johnson comes in. He's been doing some really fascinating work tracking how online groups across various platforms, Facebook, Gab, 4chan, all these different platforms, connect and share information, mainly through links.
So it's not just happening on one platform. It's more like this web that spans the entire internet.
Exactly. What Johnson found is that these groups, they form clusters based on their shared interests or ideologies.
Okay.
And then they link to other clusters, creating these intricate pathways for information to flow. It's not linear, it's this complex, dynamic network.
So if we imagine the internet as a city, these clusters are like neighborhoods where certain ideas kind of take root and spread to other neighborhoods through those connections.
I like that. That's a great analogy.
So that's how an idea that might start in like a fringe group can eventually make its way to the mainstream.
Exactly. And it's through these inter-platform links that misinformation can jump from those more fringe communities to those mainstream platforms, reaching a much wider audience.
Right. That makes the whole challenge of combating misinformation even more daunting. If it's not confined to one platform, how do you even begin to contain it?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's what we're going to explore the next part of our deep dive.
So we've got this web of misinformation, right? It spans the internet, connects different groups, different platforms. It's starting to feel like an impossible problem to solve. Like, where do you even begin to tackle something this complex?
It's definitely a challenge. But Johnson's research offers some really interesting insights into potential strategies. A lot of people think that the solution is just to shut down those pathways, cut off the links between those platforms.
Yeah, that seems like the most straightforward approach. You stop the flow of information between those groups and you stop the spread of misinformation, right?
Yeah, it's a logical assumption. And Johnson and his team actually looked into this idea. They modeled what would happen if you disrupt those inter-platform links, how that could affect the spread of misinformation.
So instead of just trying to remove individual pieces of content or even banning users, you target the connections themselves.
Exactly. And to really understand the potential impact of this approach, they had to come up with a new way to calculate the R value, one that takes into account those dynamic connections between these online groups.
Okay, so instead of just measuring how many people one person infects, this new R value, it looks at how those ideas actually travel across those interconnected clusters. This is where things get really interesting, I think. What did they find?
Well, their analysis, it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet, but it suggests that targeting those inter-platform links could be way more effective than just focusing on individual posts or even platforms.
Oh, wow. Okay, so instead of trying to play whack-a-mole with every piece of misinformation that pops up, you go after those major transmission lines, like cutting off the supply routes or something.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really interesting is that this approach could actually potentially slow down the spread significantly, even if you can't completely eliminate it. It's a more strategic way of thinking about the problem.
It really is. Makes you wonder why more hasn't been done to explore this approach. Is it just too difficult to implement?
It's definitely a complex undertaking, that's for sure. I mean, the internet is vast, it's constantly evolving, and these connections, they're fluid, they're dynamic.
Yeah.
Right. But Johnson argues that even disrupting just a small number of these key links could have this ripple effect,
Yeah.
and really slow down the spread of misinformation.
It's like identifying those super spreader individuals, but on like a network level. You find the hubs where the misinformation is flowing, and you disrupt those connections.
Precisely. And frankly, it might be a lot more feasible than trying to regulate every single corner of the internet.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really compelling argument. It's starting to feel like a more manageable problem when you think about it that way. But even if we could disrupt those links, are there other tools that we can use to combat misinformation?
Absolutely. Fact-checking organizations like Snopes and PolitiFact play a really crucial role. They're constantly working to debunk those false claims, provide accurate information.
Yeah, fact-checking is so important. But it always feels like a reactive measure, Like by the time a fact check is published, the misinformation has already spread like wildfire.
You're absolutely right. It often struggles to keep up with the sheer volume and the speed of misinformation online. And you know what? Even when people are presented with the accurate information, they may not be willing to change their minds.
Right. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier with people clinging to those beliefs that confirm their worldview. A fact check might not be enough to change someone's mind if they've already decided that something is true.
Right. Yeah, and that's a huge challenge. It's not just about providing the correct information. It's about overcoming those psychological barriers, the things that make people resistant to changing what they believe.
So what can we do if fact checking isn't always enough? Are there other approaches that might be more effective?
Well, one area that's really crucial is education, and media literacy. We need to give people those skills to critically evaluate information, to identify bias, to figure out what sources are credible and what sources are unreliable.
So it's not just about telling people what's true and what's false. It's about giving them the tools to figure it out for themselves.
Exactly. We have to empower people to be like savvy consumers of information, especially in the online world where anyone can publish anything.
It's like teaching people to be digital detectives.
I like that. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
We need to teach people how to look for those clues, how to evaluate sources, how to cross-check information. It's about developing that healthy skepticism and a critical eye.
Makes me think about how we teach kids about stranger danger. We give them the knowledge and the skills to stay safe in the physical world. We need to do the same thing for the digital world.
I agree. I think media literacy should be a core part of education in the 21st century. It's not just about knowing how to use the technology. It's about understanding how to navigate the information landscape, responsibly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got those strategies, disrupting the flow of misinformation between platforms, promoting fact-checking, and then focusing on education and media literacy. Are there any other players in this fight against misinformation that we should be thinking about?
Oh, there's one more that's really crucial. Journalism. Traditionally, journalists, they've been the gatekeepers of information. They played a vital role in verifying facts and holding those in power accountable.
Right. But the media landscape has changed so much with social media and, the 24/7 news cycle. It feels like the lines have blurred between, what's credible journalism and what's just opinion or speculation.
Yeah, and I think that pressure to be first, to generate clicks and engagement has definitely created some challenges for traditional journalism. And this fast-paced environment can sometimes lead to the spread of inaccurate information, even from reputable news outlets.
Right, right. So how do we ensure that journalism is actually playing a positive role in combating misinformation in this new media landscape?
Well, it's complex, but I think one crucial step is to support quality journalism. We have to value and invest in organizations that prioritize accuracy, fact-checking, in-depth reporting.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that good journalism is essential to a healthy democracy. We need those reliable sources of information to counter all of that misinformation that's constantly flooding the internet.
Absolutely. Credible journalism is this vital check on the spread of false and misleading information. It's really a cornerstone of a well-informed society.
But even with all these efforts disrupting those links, fact-checking, education, supporting quality journalism, it still feels like we're facing this uphill battle. Is there any hope of actually, curing this infodemic?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to a really interesting perspective offered by Renee DiResta. She's a disinformation researcher at the Stanford Internet Observatory.
Okay.
And she argues that misinformation is less like an acute illness that we can cure and more like a chronic disease, something that we need to manage.
So it's something that we're just going to have to constantly grapple with. There's no, like, quick fix.
It seems that way. There's no easy solution. There's no magic bullet. But by understanding how it spreads, who those key players are, what strategies are most effective, we can hopefully mitigate its impact.
It's almost like we need to develop a societal immune system to misinformation.
Right.
We have to build up our defenses and be prepared to constantly adapt to new threats.
That's a great way to put it. We have to be vigilant. We have to be critical. We have to be informed. We need to be proactive in seeking out accurate information and figuring out what's fact and what's fiction. And that's something that we're going to talk about more in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've spent this whole deep dive, exploring this world of online misinformation. And I think it's become pretty clear that it's complex, right? There's no easy answers. But knowing that it's something we're going to have to manage, I guess, long term, where do we go from here? Like, what can we as individuals actually do to sort of navigate this infodemic responsibly?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about the big picture, the research, and all of that. But ultimately, it comes down to, each of us and the choices that we make.
Yeah, and so much of what we've talked about, it feels, I don't know, a little overwhelming. Like, where do we even begin to be more responsible about the information that we consume and share online?
Well, I think the first step is just developing a healthy dose of skepticism. Don't just automatically assume that everything that you see online is true, just because it's there.
It's easy to get caught up in the moment, especially when you see something that's shared by, someone you trust.
Right. But it's important to remember that anyone can share anything online, regardless of whether it's true or not. So question those assumptions. Be willing to dig a little deeper.
Don't just take things at face value. It's like that old saying, trust but verify.
Exactly. And the good news is we have so many tools now to help us verify information. We've got fact-checking websites, reverse image search. We've got reputable news sources. I mean, these can be really helpful in sorting out what's fact and what's fiction.
So step one is be a critical thinker, be a skeptic. What else can we do?
Think about the sources that you're relying on. Are they credible? Do they have a history of accuracy? Are they transparent about their biases? I mean, these are all really important things to consider.
It's like evaluating the credentials of an expert before you take their advice. Like, you wouldn't just trust some random person off the street to give you medical advice, right?
Exactly. We should apply that same level of scrutiny to the information that we're consuming online. Just because something's got a lot of likes or shares or retweets doesn't mean that it's accurate.
So be mindful of where that information is coming from and look beyond the surface, I guess, right? Like, beyond just how popular something seems to be. What are some other, like, red flags that we should be on the lookout for?
Pay attention to how you feel. Misinformation often plays on our emotions, like our fears or our anger or our biases to try to get us to react and share. If something is making you feel really strongly, take a step back and ask yourself why.
So if I'm reading something and I suddenly feel, I don't know, outraged or anxious, that should be like a warning sign.
It could be. It could be a sign that the information is designed to manipulate you. Ask yourself, are you getting the whole story? Is there another side to consider?
Take a breath, step back, try to look at things objectively. That's great advice. What if you're still unsure about something even after, you've done all that?
Don't be afraid to talk to other people, consult with friends, with family, even, experts if you can to get different perspectives.
It's like crowdsourcing your fact-checking in a way.
Exactly. I mean, having those conversations can help you see things from different angles and get a more well-rounded understanding. And finally, if you do come across misinformation, think about what you can do.
Like, what kind of action can we take as individuals?
Well, you can report it to the platform. You can engage in dialogue to try to correct the record, or just simply choose not to share it. I mean, every little bit helps.
So we're not powerless. Like, we do have the ability to kind of push back against this, to stop the spread of misinformation, even if it's just in small ways.
Absolutely. We're all part of this digital ecosystem, and our choices do matter.
That's a really empowering message. We're not just passive consumers of information, right? We're active participants.
We have a responsibility to be informed and discerning and engaged.
Well said. This deep dive has been so eye-opening, really. We've learned about how misinformation spreads, the role of those super spreaders, the power of those inter-platform links, and the importance of those individual actions.
It's been great exploring this with you. Knowledge is power, but it's only power if we use it wisely.
That's a great point to end on, I think. And that wraps up another deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged, everyone. Until next time.